Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Views on View. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. And we are live on video, and you can see that. Anyway, with me, I have a new contributor. Let's say hi to David Neal. How you doing, David?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to have you. For those who may or may not remember, we talked to David a little over a year ago on episode 200 of Views on View. He is the well-known artist and dad joke purveyor, which is even more awesome for me. I had initially heard of David when he was discussing how he learned to draw to make his presentations more engaging at conferences and the impact that had. And he does quite a bit of stuff in terms of his work and his drawing and his dad jokes. So why don't you give us a background, David? Talk a little bit about just sort of an introduction again for those that might not have listened to the last one about all those things and who you are and what you do.
Yep. Well, my name is David Neal. I've been a software developer for quite a long time. I got started building applications back on Visual Basic and Pascal, Turbo Pascal, and all that kind of stuff. When the web started taking off in the 90s, I jumped on board and started building web applications with, what we now refer to as classic ASP. And then active server pages became, I did VB script and also JScript, started learning JavaScript, and using it both front end and back end. And then ASP.NET came along and I jumped on that and was a ASP.NET and C# developer, SQL Server, all that kind of stuff for many, many years. And so since the 90s, I have been a web developer primarily throughout my career. I've worn a lot of hats, been in a lot of different kinds of roles, but have always stayed true to building web apps and using JavaScript, for better or worse, and throughout its years of growing pains. And about 10 years ago, I switched to Node.js and have been using that as my primary platform for building a lot of not only web applications, but desktop applications as well, using Electron. And I've used a number of front-end frameworks, starting with jQuery and MooTools and things back in the day to, let's see, what was it? Backbone and Marionette and Knockout, and React came along, and I used that for many years. And then when Vue came out, it seemed like it was like the most comfortable thing that I had used to date. It like brought all the great ideas from other frameworks that I liked, and just felt like coming home. And that's been my go-to for front-end web development now for the last several years.
Yeah, that brings back some memories. I can remember using BASIC on a Commodore 64 in high school. And then I can remember going to college, late 80s, and typing my economics thesis on all DOS, WordPerfect. But a couple of programming classes I took at school was BASIC, just straight BASIC.
Yep.
And I can't remember what computers were used. And then Turbo Pascal. And so I was curious, did you ever do much production stuff with Turbo Pascal?
I sure did. Pascal was one of the languages I learned when I was in college, which I was using a Commodore 64 to write a lot of my papers and things. And I'd go to the computer labs to work on computer science projects. Sometimes it feels like I'm in the minority that I actually have a computer science degree when so many people in tech come from other backgrounds, which I think is awesome. So many different journeys of people that got into computers and tech who are from all different walks and backgrounds. But yeah, I got started learning basic on TRS-80 and then the Commodore 64. But my first, I guess, real job, if you want to call it that, out of college was working for a software company in tech support. And the company actually, their product was built using Pascal. They use Borland Pascal and TurboVision and some other tools around that. So it was a kind of more, slightly more professional, I guess, than just your Turbo Pascal. Um, and I use my Pascal skills to write utilities and things to automate some tasks in tech support. I started contributing to some of the internal tools that we had that managed our CRM. We used DBase, and that was shared across a peer-to-peer network system. And yeah, I built quite a few things that were kind of production, kind of real. They were real apps that I and other folks used, and that was my gateway into um, doing more and more programming.
Yeah, I can remember doing Pascal, and that was the only time I ended up using it was in my college course. I never did end up using it in a production environment, probably because I didn't really get into programming full time for another 14, 15 years. Um, but yeah, I can still remember that, and it amazes me. I look back now. I remember I had so much problems just understanding arrays. I didn't understand what arrays were. I couldn't quite get my head around it for some reason. And now I've used them for years and pretty good at them. But yeah, and then I remember getting into what do you call it? VBA, Visual Basic
Right.
for applications inside
Right.
of Microsoft Access databases. I was like, oh, this is cool what you can do here, and using some Access, and then never really
Yeah.
did a little bit of VB6 when I was at Freightliner.
Yeah. That's kind of how I got started with VB myself was VBA.
Mhm.
But I do remember in college, recursions, recursive functions were what really threw me for a loop.
Oh yeah.
Ba-doom-ching. Um,
Sorry, I don't have my sound effects here like I did in our old system yet. So I gotta. Otherwise, I'd throw one there for you.
Yeah, but VBA was kind of like my introduction to Visual Basic, and I guess I started using Visual Basic itself around version 3. So there was VBA in Excel 5, I think, and some of the engineers. I did a lot of IT stuff in the 90s. I didn't become a full-time programmer for a while, but that was my introduction to Visual Basic, which later turned into VB3, VB4, VB5, and 6, and I used Access and SQL Server and other things to build some apps.
Yeah. Yeah, I can remember ASP being the first sort of scripting language. I went the PHP route. Never really got into the ASP side of things just because there was supposedly a position coming open at my company for a PHP MySQL person. I was like, this is cool. I got to learn it, and learned it, but then the job never materialized, but I knew it anyway. And so I went from there. I remember about, when was this? 2017. I got hired at a company, and we were converting from some very old Microsoft stuff to a Drupal front end, and using Apache Solar as a back end. But I had to convert from a classic ASP app um, running on, I want to say, SQL Server 2000 and something else that Microsoft wasn't going to be supporting at all if they hadn't already been not supporting it for a few years. So I was trying to read it going, yeah, we ended up bringing in the retired developers who had written it to come help me just interpret what it was doing.
It could along with similar to other scripting languages, it could quickly devolve into some very spaghetti type code that was so hard to to follow, and because you got your templating, and the syntax and everything was just all jammed together. It was so
Hmm.
hard to make heads or tails out of what was going on. Yeah, that was the fun days.
Well, that was the same thing with PHP, and it is still to this day how you can mix HTML with PHP, and so you really
Yeah,
have to work to separate your concerns. Have your code here, and then your templating here, and just your variables, and the
yeah,
CMS is like Drupal and WordPress do that quite a lot. But yeah, that's the risk of having something very flexible like that, is you can make one jumbled mess very quickly.
yeah. Yeah, I started developing a lot of my own kind of practices in separating the code from the HTML and things, just to make it more manageable and maintainable. That was one of the reasons why I switched to JScript. I was following this guy named James Shaw back in the day, who was writing a lot of JScript instead of VB script, and I just liked the syntax, and I liked the fact that you know, the JScript and the JavaScript were so very similar, and I could just focus on the one language, and that really appealed to me, and that's what appealed to me later on with Node.js, is being able to use JavaScript, across all the code that you needed to touch.
Yeah, I think the term there is isomorphic, right? Where you can use the same language all the way across.
Yeah,
For sure. And then then you got into Node. So just curious side note here. Um, the other podcast I'm on, JavaScript Jabber, we just recorded an episode that hasn't been released yet on Bun JS. Have you seen Bun?
yeah.
And it's supposedly a new runtime that has some stuff built in. And I'm not a Node developer, so I really can't make a comparison. Have you done any comparison or contrasting between the
I,
two?
I've played around with it a little bit. Like I'm subscribed to several JavaScript and Node.js newsletters, weekly, emails. And so I keep up on the news of Bun. And each time I see that there's a new release, I'll go and update the one I have installed, and I'll play around with it a little bit. And, you know, I can see that in some cases it could be a lot faster. Like some of the things I read about it is like it can be much, much faster
Mhm.
in executing, building projects and executing code. But at the same time, I hear of there's still edge cases and things that still break when when using it. So I've shied away from it just to see how it matures, and maybe someday I'll try taking some of my own projects and switch them over to Bun, just to see if it's a good experience or not.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's still fairly new, but somewhat solid. I can't remember what the release is. Like I said, I don't know it well enough to say. We had quite the conversation on JavaScript Jabber the other day, so that'll be an interesting uh, episode to listen to. So now you mentioned using Vue. What other frameworks had you looked at? Any other frameworks? Or you said it came from React, right? So any other frameworks you looked at before diving into Vue?
Yeah, React was the more recent. Um, Before that, I was using Aurelia for a while.
I've heard
I
of
was
Aurelia. Hmm.
uh, a fan of Rob Eisenberg and the work that he had done. Um, he had done some stuff, I think Caliburn, and um, I forget what else, but I knew him to be a very smart person. And so I ran into him at a conference years ago, and we got to talking about his Aurelia project, and like, that sounds really great. I think I'll give that a try. And so I used that on two or three web projects, and enjoyed that. Um, and I probably would have stayed with it for a while, but the startup company I was working for, decided to go with React, and I'm like, well, it's important for me to learn React, and I like the principles with React. I like some of the disciplines there, and I like the shadow DOM and all the stuff that they were doing around optimizing the rendering process. But the the message passing and there were so many things about it that just still seemed like, created a lot of friction for me. And it was hard for me to wrap my head around or to have a fun time building apps. It's like I continued to have a little bit of frustration, and I didn't like that feeling. And but when I got a hold of Vue and started using that, it really clicked with me. Before Aurelia, I I'm guessing I was still using Backbone, maybe Knockout, because I think I dabbled with Knockout for a little while. Yeah.
Now, what did those do? Now, when I was using Drupal, I always knew that Backbone was built in. It was something you could use, and then they started incorporating jQuery too. But was Backbone like a server side thing, or was that client side?
Yeah, it was
What did it
client
do for
side.
you? Okay.
Yes, and it was a kind of a templating based approach to building front end um, view, executable um, SPA type apps. I guess
Mhm.
it was the early days of SPA and figuring out. So it was more of a framework, I guess you would say, on some patterns around JavaScript templates and things. It's been
Okay.
so long now. I don't hardly I don't hardly remember.
Right. Right. So you came probably like me. You came in with Vue 2.0 was
Yes.
the current. Yeah, same here. I came in when it was Vue 2.0. I came from the Angular side of things. Angular was a real um, framework that I had seen and had worked in using what is now called Angular JS. I can't even remember if it's even supported. I heard a podcast about Angular the other day. I can't
Yeah.
remember if that's even supported anymore. What's called 1.0, right?
Yeah. I looked at Angular back when it first came out, and that was something I wanted. I wanted to find something that wasn't Angular, because what I saw in Angular I didn't really like, and that was one of the reasons why I used Aurelia, is because that seemed to me at the time the best alternative to Angular.
Right. Yeah, our Angular one is pretty confusing. I can remember trying to use it and understand how everything all fit together. And I did a bunch of work with Angular one with a platform called Form.io, which was a really neat platform. It's got some really cool stuff that you can do with forms. Um, but I remember the one benefit it had was exposing me to services and the concept of services, because I remember when Drupal 8 came out and they started talking about services with Symfony and everything was Symfony based. I was like, I know what those are. I know exactly how those work based on what I had learned, from the Angular world. But like you said, once I got into Vue and the single file component structure and your code's here and your templating's here and this is how it all fits together and and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. To me, that was just a lot easier and more instinctive, I guess is the best word
Yeah.
uh, to um, to put it. But and now, have you ever had the opportunity to get into Vue 3
Yeah. So
at all?
the last few projects I've done, especially with Electron, I've used Vue 3.
Okay, so Electron, just for people who don't know, is sort of one of the more well-known tools, I think, for creating cross-platform apps, so
Yes.
that you could run on Android or iOS or on the web. I think two of the
I
more
No. So Electron is strictly for desktop
oh,
apps. So
it's desktop? I thought it was phone apps as well for some reason.
yeah, no, it's for
I stand
building apps
corrected.
that are that run on Mac, Windows, or
That's right.
Linux.
Okay, that's right.
And it if you use Visual Studio Code, which a lot of folks do
Right.
now, that is an Electron application.
Yep,
So
I was
elect
gonna say
oh,
that. So was Slack.
yep, Slack, and there's lots of others. But it's essentially Node.js and Chromium, which is the UI rendering uh, component of Chrome.
Right.
So the two of those are kind of married together with Node.js glue to give you a development environment where you can use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build your desktop applications. And in some cases, you can't tell the difference that an app is built with web technologies than a native app.
So I haven't had an opportunity to write anything Electron. So is it basically, let's say you want to write something in Vue. Are you creating a Vue project and it incorporates Electron, and then Electron generates your final output that is what's actually put on your computer? Or are you actually writing Electron specific code, or how exactly does that work?
Yeah, you'll start with an Electron project, and then you can bring in Vue as a framework to give you a better experience for building the UI for the Electron project. And there are some project templates out there. A, a great place to start is there's a resource out there called Awesome Electron, I think
Yeah.
it is,
Mm-hmm.
which just gives you the entire catalog of just about anything and everything Electron. And there's a number of like boilerplate or starter projects, and some of those are based on Vue, where you can say, okay, I'm going to clone this, and this will be my starting point for building a desktop application with the Vue that I'm comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the awesome, uh, what's the term I'm using? Structure is used for quite a number of things. There's an awesome Vue as well they're basically just sort of catalogs of all the different um, resources that are out there for a
Yeah.
uh, particular framework or tool set, libraries and educational resources and tool sets and you name it. So if you're into a particular project, look up the awesome whatever it is, and generally you'll find it. And there are GitHub repos is what they are.
Yep.
Like I said, Vue has one called Awesome Vue that's under the Vue.js namespace itself. And I'll put the link in here as soon as I can find my window. But yeah, those are great resources for learning that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's our Awesome Vue. Awesome. No pun intended. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. So we were talking ahead of time about what you're doing now, which seems to delve into a different world. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm getting into something totally mostly new. So over the years, I have done a lot of work with databases, and I even spent many years doing data warehousing, which is a very different skill set or different approach to working with data than your traditional transactional systems. So
It's basically a very large, huge sets of data is what it is,
yeah,
isn't it?
very, very large sets of data. So there's different approaches to how you model that data, how you structure it, how you optimize it so that it's easier to query and create reports and create analysis and all that kinds of stuff. So I have like this old school knowledge of data warehousing. But I've always been really interested in databases. So I recently joined a startup company called Mother Duck, and it is a really fun platform for doing data analysis, reporting, analytics, all the kind of data diving things you may want to do with whatever kinds of sets of data you have, and it's based on an open source product called DuckDB. DuckDB is if you're familiar with SQLite, which is like this really extremely portable database that you can plug into your, maybe your build process, or for doing offline stuff, or for playing around with data locally. SQLite is a transactional type database, where DuckDB is a similar, extremely lightweight, portable database engine for doing analytics. So it's perfect for doing any kind of analysis and querying, data science stuff. A lot of um, folks in the data community are using DuckDB to do analytics on their machine. The thing is that, today our machines are so powerful and are underutilized for the work that we can do on them. So DuckDB is taking advantage of that, and MotherDuck is the cloud version of DuckDB, where you can run data on your local machine. You can have it in the cloud. You can connect with other folks who are sharing data, and yeah, it's a pretty cool platform.
So is DuckDB at its heart, is it a SQL database then, or is it sort of
Yeah,
SQL on steroids, or a
it's
version of it?
yeah, it's based on standard SQL. So if you understand the ANSI SQL language, it's got all the same commands and constructs of the SQL language. But DuckDB has some cool things built into it, where it can read and write CSV, Excel. It can read like all kinds of different data formats natively. There's an extension system so that you can plug in other features and capabilities that may not exist. So if you have data that's in Amazon or Azure or Google, you can use the tools that are built into DuckDB to query that data directly. And it's like unbelievably fast and powerful for reading gigabytes of data.
Okay. So basically, what you're saying is you can plug into a data source and use SQL language on that data, even though it's not in a SQL table
Yep.
structure.
Yeah.
I
So
would
if you
just,
have like if you download, say you got Stack Overflow has a download that's gigabytes in size, and you want to like figure out what are some of the top questions or the most popular things, or there's some kind of analysis you want to do on that huge data set. You don't have to build any kind of apps to like convert that data into a database or anything like that. You can use DuckDB to query against that data directly.
well, and you can do it just locally. You
Mm-hmm.
said it's something that runs locally
Yep,
on your machine, and it's pretty lightweight. Is it like embeddable then?
it
Would you
is.
embed it in a product like you do SQLite?
Yep, you sure can. So there's lots of folks who are in. There's even a DuckDB WASM, so you can run it in the browser and use it as a query tool in the browser.
So how would you use it in the browser, querying just some remote data source then, or some local data source?
Yeah, you can use paths to query data locally, or load in stuff from, like, say, a HTTP endpoint. It can query APIs. It can query files that are stored on other web servers. Um, the it's got pretty powerful capabilities.
But I would assume that it's got to be in some sort of readable format, right? Something that, give me this from this. Okay, what are the definitions of my columns or rows or data sources, right?
Yeah, so it has a lot of intelligence built into it. So when you like consume a CSV file, it can infer from the structure of the CSV um, what your data types are, and column names, and and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to define any of that unless you really have to.
So even if you said, let's say you're using a CSV and you pass it in without, the first row being names, then somehow it's going to determine from the data itself, oh, this is this kind of data or this kind of data.
Yeah. I mean, you may get some generic uh, column names if you don't specify, what you want those columns to be named. If there's no first row that defines the names of the columns, but it'll infer from the data that's in the columns what the data types are.
Interesting. Is that using AI? That sounds like an AI sort of tool, either that or a heck of a lot of code. Well, this looks like
It,
this, so let's use this, and a lot of regexes or something.
yeah, I don't know the internals of it, but it seems to be, with everything that I've tried it on so far, it's been really smart.
Hmm. So now you said data science. So how about give us, I've never looked this up. What's a good definition of data science?
Um, that is a good question. That's something that I'm also learning. I'm like I said, I'm new to a lot of these things. So data science, at least my perspective, is that people who are using it for research, who are like tapping into data collected on, say, uh, populations or um, scientific um measurements and things to like come up with answering questions about how to solve problems in the world of science.
Hmm. Yeah, we hired at my company, we deal with mounds and mounds of government contracting data. And so we brought a data science guy in, and that's all he works on is that and funneling it into AI and designing models and all this stuff that allows us to say, okay, this is all the patterns we're getting from this data and sort of allow us to try to be predictive. Saying
Yeah.
based on past data, this is what we're going to see, or this is what we're going to do, or doing a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Data science probably involves a lot of statistical analysis and math
yes,
that
yes,
I don't yet know.
yeah. It's just to hear him talk. Well, I'm doing this and this, and I say, yeah, sounds good. Keep doing it. Just I like playing with data itself, and I'm most of my years I've been in a SQL environment, so I'm very comfortable with querying data and tying it together and updating it and all that kind of stuff. Mongo, not so much, just because it's harder and not quite as flexible when it comes to querying across collections, because that's it's not how it's designed to be. But yeah, data can be fun. When you sort of got to be geeky to get into it. No insult there, but I consider myself a geek just for liking playing with data and getting it all pieced together and figuring out what it's doing and stuff. So, but that's cool. So, how do you get into? You mentioned that you didn't have a lot of training and stuff. Do you get into it more just because you've got your practical experience with development in general and decide this is the route I want to go down?
Yeah. So like I said, I've been a long time SQL nerd. I like databases. And so the two things that really attracted me to Mother Duck in particular is, one, it involves SQL. It involves looking at data, something that I used to do a lot of and would enjoy diving back into again.
Mhm.
The data analytics and the new data science world with AI um, and and the advancements that have been made around modeling and everything, that's interesting to me. And the other thing is, Mother Duck is like, that's a that's a fun brand to work with, because it's, there's ducks, there's duck puns,
Oh
there's
yeah.
they don't, as a company, we don't take ourselves too seriously and we like to have fun. So that's right up my alley.
For sure. Yeah, I was thinking, I was looking for this and they're hard to find anymore. But back when I was like in high school, there was this whole series of duck shirts The one that I always remembered, I had two of them. One was probably the most famous one was one that said Mallard Jested, and it showed a duck with his head like spun around backwards, right? And I had another one said Just Another Bill, and it shows a duck standing at the mailbox, and there's a bill sticking out of it. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be like a financial bill. There was a whole 4 or 5 of them, and they were awesome. I love those so much. Uh, and I actually came across, I was at a store, like a tourist, souvenir store down at the coast, the Oregon coast one time, and somebody had a whole ton of them. And I should have bought them all right then and there. Stuck them on my credit card, but I didn't. And I wish I had. So awesome. They were great. So what kinds of, speaking of puns, while I'm thinking about this, one of the things that you have published within the last, 2 years, 1 year, is your book
Yeah.
of dad jokes.
Yep.
And what's it called again?
It's called The Illustrated Book of Dad Jokes.
Dad jokes. So talking about illustration, and we mentioned this before and you talked about it. Can you just sort of give us a brief history of your drawing skills and how that started and how you developed them, and how amazing that's been for you to be able to do that?
Yeah. So 13 or 14 years ago, I started getting involved in the developer community and helping out with a meetup in Nashville, Tennessee, where I used to live, and started being encouraged and seeing other speakers come in and give presentations. I finally got up the courage to start giving my own talks and speaking at conferences. And as I got better as a speaker, I was looking for ways to be a more effective speaker, ways to like, how can I express, more of my own style of humor or make my talks more fun and engaging. And I came across this guy named Dan Rome, who wrote a book called Show and Tell, and it's about how you can use really simple hand-drawn graphics like lines and arrows and stick figures and just basic shapes. He made it look and uh, help me to realize that it doesn't take much to make a presentation much more fun and engaging. And I thought, man, I really want to do that. So I started drawing to augment my slides in the presentations I was giving, and I fell in love with it, and I started drawing more and more, and that became like a hobby, and now it's kind of a side business for me. I draw illustrations for social media, for blog posts, for books. I do logos and graphic design and all kinds of things now that are a direct result of me. Like, I just want to figure out how I can communicate better and be more entertaining. And so in 2021, I took on a personal challenge to draw a dad joke every day. And it started with like, hey, I wonder if I could do this for a month. And so I did it for a month straight, and like I was having so much fun with it. I was getting so much great feedback. I decided to just, well, I wonder how long I can continue to do this. And I ended up drawing a dad joke every day for a year, 365 illustrations. And throughout the year, people would be asking me, can I get a copy of these? Can I get a book of these or a calendar or whatever? And so I eventually I took 250 of my favorite ones, turned it into a book, and published it on Amazon.
Right. Yeah, I just put up the link here on the screen. Uh, that's from your site, reverentgeek.com, and there's the whole page there on the illustrated book of dad jokes, and a link to get it on Amazon if you want to get it. So those of you who've listened to the show know that I am a regular purveyor of dad jokes, some worse than others, but to the discipline. And I try to do I do about 5 days a week. I put one in my work Slack and on Twitter and on Facebook. But I haven't done. I usually don't publish one 7 days of the week. So that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So yeah, the link's out there, reverendgeek.com, and you can see the link to Amazon from there if you want to buy it. That almost screams for a desk calendar.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a desk calendar that actually was my inspiration to begin with. Like when I got a dad joke desk calendar for Christmas, and that's what was like, oh, these are great. I would love to draw that. And so I would take some of the ones that were in that calendar and I would tweak them in ways that, oh, if I change the wording or the context of this, it would make for a funnier visual. And that's what I would do, is like, rarely did I create my own dad jokes. I would just go looking for dad jokes, and I would see one that was good, but then I would always put my own spin on it to, like, oh, but if I changed it around or did this tweak to it, it would make for a better visual pun or a visual gag. And so that's how a lot of those came about.
Yeah, you definitely. I think I could spot your style in the middle of other people, because I've looked at so many of your drawings and stuff. You certainly have your own style. I think when it comes to, in terms of the lines and shapes and way you draw things.
Yep.
For sure. I think you're on you do it on Instagram, right? Are you Reverend Geek on Instagram and
Yep.
Twitter and everywhere else?
Yep, Reverend Geek everywhere.
So where did that username come from? At least the geek part I get, but the reverent part, where does that come from?
Yeah, well, that harkens back to I used to do a lot of web hosting for nonprofits, churches, ministries, and I ran this free web hosting service for years, where I provided that for hundreds of organizations and individuals, and that was a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of folks through that, and so for years I was kind of, my online identity was kind of in surrounded, or was wrapped up in that hosting, and that was also tied to ASP.NET. And as I kind of looked into the future and like, well, I don't know that I'm going to be an ASP.NET developer for the rest of my life, and I don't know that I'm going to be doing this hosting. This may not even be a thing anymore, in the future. So I decided to change my own personal brand to be to Reverend Geek, and that kind of like hinted to my my personal faith and my view of humanity, and
no pun intended.
and to like give hints towards, I really want to be a positive impact on society and the development world and all those things. So that was the kind of the best of those two things together.
Cool. Yeah, I always get asked about. Everybody has interesting histories of their their nicknames. Some are just their name, and it's like, okay, well, I get that one. But I've heard some other really interesting names. Mine is Wonder95, and I think I've described this before, but when you grow up in the 70s and 80s and your name is Steve, you're going to get called Stevie Wonder quite a bit. And just it was par for the course. It comes with the territory, whatever euphemism you want to use. And my first software job, I started like you doing tech support. for a banking software company. And somebody there started calling me Wonder. Said, "You look like a Wonder Bread kind of guy, white." And okay, and it stuck. And so my first email address I had back in the um, this is mid '90s, late '90s, when the internet really started becoming a thing from a consumer standpoint for the general public, um, was Wonder at this small dial-up ISP that I had at the time. And that one went kaput, and I went to a bigger one, and that name was already taken by somebody else for an email address. And so I just threw on the year that I picked up the Wonder name, and went to Wonder 95. And not exactly the most common, but not too long ago, this was a funny story. I got an email one day, and it was a registration email for like a credit card or an account at a big online retailer or something like that. And um, oh, take it back. That was my other name. I take that back. It's my other name. I use another one that's my email has always been Killshot91. And people think, what do you like to shoot people? Are you a hunter? No, I was a diehard tournament racquetball player for years and years, and played tournaments, went to nationals, and played at the
Oh,
open
that's
level,
awesome.
which is the top amateur level. I got to play pros once in a while. Yes, there are professional racquetball players. But anybody who played racquetball recognized it as soon as they saw it. And one day I get this email to that email address that's signing up for something else using that email. And I see all this guy's personal information. I called him up, says, "I think we got a problem here. I don't think you want to use my email address for this information." He's like, "Oh, sorry. It was my address is the same thing at another provider like AOL, or I forget which one it was."
Hmm.
And so I called him and I talked to him. I said, "Just out of curiosity, where'd you get that name?" He goes, "Oh, I'm a hunter." And that was the first time I went hunting. I got something on my first shot. And so my friends called me Kill Shot. And I said, "Let me guess, that was 1991, right?" He goes, "Yep." I said, "Okay, that makes sense." It's sort of a funny story. So, all right. Well, we're coming up on time here. We've been talking about quite a bit of stuff. So we're looking forward to having David join me here on Views on View coming up. Next week, we have a good interview lined up. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are part of the show where we can talk about whatever we want, whether it's tech, non-tech, books, games, food, movies, you name it. I'm going to pick an article I found. This is on Hacker News, and this is it's from space.com, so it has to do with astronomy. And that's astronomy and cosmology are things that I've read about quite a bit over the past couple decades. And one of the things that's been really well known is the successor to the Hubble telescope is the James Webb Space Telescope. And the clarity and the improved visuals that we're getting from the Webb as compared to the Hubble, just because of better optics and better technology and so on, is just unreal. Some of the pictures you see are just amazing. And some of the discoveries they're finding, things they're discovering sort of have them questioning previously held theories in any number of fields, just because we didn't have this amount of detail. But this one particular article on space.com talks about the telescope finding two of the most distant galaxies ever seen. And the interesting thing is about it is they use a tool called gravitational lensing. And I won't get into the details of that. Still don't comprehend it all myself. But it talks about how that it really solidifies the Big Bang Theory. And what is described as the Big Bang Theory describes, that fits how we would see planets forming, fits the theory based on what we're seeing here with the Webb telescope. So I will put we'll put the link in the show notes, and I can put it here on the screen for those that may or may not be watching. But it's really quite a fascinating article to read if you're into that kind of stuff. And then, wrong thing. Dad jokes of the week. So let's see. Oh, simple question here. If you're into camping, this is something to think about. What do bears call campers in sleeping bags? burritos, right? So I miss my rim shots. And then some random thoughts for the day that I found. Questions and thoughts. If the Earth is the third planet from the sun, doesn't that make every country a third world country? Right. And then one note: milking is taking milk, but watering is actually giving water. All right, so it's a taking versus giving. All pregnant women are bodybuilders. Think about it, you're building a body. And finally, needless to say, saying needless to say is needless to say.
Nice.
Right, very good. So those are my picks and dad jokes of the week. What do you have for us, David?
Well, I do have one good joke that I heard recently. Did you know that the dog to human years ratio is inaccurate?
I did not.
It's really just a rough estimate.
Very good. Rough estimate. It's like the talking dog. Hey, where'd that toy go? Roof. Oh, it's on the roof.
Yeah.
I can't remember. That's just the one I remember. I'm gonna have to look up the whole routine. Pretty good routine. All righty. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for everybody for coming on and listening to us ramble about histories and all the development tools out there. A little bit about Vue, but not too much. We will definitely get more into that down the road. Thanks, David, for joining us. Good to have you.
Thank you.
We will talk at you next time on Views on Vue.
See ya.